Hi, my name is Brooke Rodriguez. I'm a Taino mother living in Matinacock territory.
Mijuxis. My name is Desiree Kane. I'm a Miwok Two Spirit.
OCO, my name is Mia Beverly. I am from Sandhill Band of Cherokee and Lenape, and welcome to First Foods,
a program made by and for Indigenous people and our allies
who are ready for a new day for old ways. First Foods program is produced by Grinding Stone Collective in partnership with Green Feather Foundation and Her Many Voices Foundation,
along with important support from community members like you.
We have some protocols we'd like to go over with you.
Land acknowledgement. We recognize, uphold, and respect Native nations and their lifeways above all else as the ruling governance of Turtle Island and Abya Yala. Everyone attending this space must uphold the same.
Native knowledge. Lessons learned are not for non-natives to monetize on or repackage as their own. Native knowledge systems belong to the cultural communities they come from and to the guest teachers in our programming.
Foraging and harvesting. Always seek permission from tribal communities to forage and harvest. These medicines or foods may be seasonal or being left to replenish themselves. Also respect if the answer is no.
Intertribal space. We are all from different nations and regions, so what may be odd or undesirable as food to you might be good to someone else. Respect that and don't insult or belittle. Respect tribal food, land, and medicine sovereignty. Remember that majority of foods are shared by many different tribes, but with different names. Do not try to claim exclusivity or copyright for your own people. It's okay to share the name as you know it. It is not okay to create dissent over a different name. No dissent over blood quantum or otherwise more Indianer than you fighting.
Food sovereignty. First people have the rights to hunt, fish, forage, and harvest in their traditional territories. It is unacceptable to critique traditional or contemporary dietary styles as a non-native. Please put any questions that you have in the chat.
The last 30 minutes of class, we often invite attendees to come on and interact with our instructors. Disclaimer: First Foods is for educational purposes only. Before using or ingesting any herb or plant for medicinal or culinary purposes, please consult a physician, medical herbalist, or suitable professional.
Tonight's class features a panel of our instructors from the last month speaking to us on the topic of food sovereignty and our everyday lives. We've done an entire month of programming on the topic of matrilineal, so foods for womanhood, for motherhood, for our bodies as we age and transition into other parts of life that include death. So we've had a really well-rounded and really life-spanning series this month of programming. So welcome to another First Foods. We've got Mia Beverly here. We've got Brooke back with us. So yeah, happy to see everybody. And Mia, I'll send it to you.
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm Mia, OCO. First Foods program is made possible through a partnership with Grinding Stone Collective, Green Feather Foundation, and Her Many Voices Foundation. Just a reminder, if you need accessibility options and prefer a live class transcription, please join us on Facebook. And so today we have Sarah and Emily. So hope you all enjoy today's session.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So Brooke is in the background. She's doing the back end because we've had some issues with Zoom, unfortunately. But so I want to just take a moment to introduce our panelists for today. We've got Sarah Calvosa. We've got Emily Vass. We encourage you to go back and when the shows are available to watch their classes. Food sovereignty, matrilineal, these are all really big concepts. So we'll start the panel off today with just a question around why governing your life and your approach to food, like why do you approach things with a matrilineal framework? What makes that matter to you in this world that things are very much built around the patriarchy, right? And uplifting non-men or uplifting men many times. So why is that part of your frame and why does it matter to you? I'll let either of you popcorn style pick it up.
Sarah, did you want to go first?
No, I, for the record, never want to go first.
Oh, okay.
But I will if you want me to.
Oh no, it's okay. I just popcorn style always. I'm like, wait, I don't want to be rude and jump in. So you guys, I appreciate the opportunity to share. So with me, as I shared in my class, food became an addiction for me really easy because my grandmother and my aunties, they used food in abundance to show love and they overdid it, and I inappropriately paired that, which happens a lot in our community, and it is the approved addiction, right? Like because we associate so much with it. So as I've become a mother and as I try to educate the community and as I am earning my auntie status now well into my 40s, I want to help change that language of nourishing ourselves appropriately with whole foods, right? It's not, I was thinking about this today. I very distinctly have a powwow memory, and I had an auntie tell me, stop it, because I was stuffing the sugar in, and she's like, stop it. She knew I was stressed by the people who were not in the right spirit at that arena. And I said, auntie, if I have something in my mouth, nothing bad can come out of it, right? Like I was trying to change the generational curses, but I was doing it so wrong, right? And so like that's the heart of what I want to share and what I want to help model is like, as we're breaking generational curses, women, remember, we can't undo hundreds of years of generational curses. We got to do this step by step, and it starts with teaching appropriate nutrition and
So Emily, I
teaching
have to,
our spirit.
some people might not have ever heard of generational curses, generational trauma, anything like that. Would you maybe just take a second and explain to folks who maybe are just encountering that language, explain what that might be?
Of course, thanks, Desiree, for bringing that up. So for me, how I consider that is there are many hurts and habits that have happened to our relatives that they've done the best they can to raise us the best they can, but they have a lot of hurts, and our blood memory is holding a lot of things that, so for example, my grandparents were raised in residential school and food was withheld from them. So when they were raising their kids, it became their priority. Any disposable income they had was given towards food. It was added to sweets. My dad has memories of getting a Coke with peanuts and putting peanuts, right? And he attached love to sugar. And then that was passed down to me as well. And my grandmother, like as much as she loved us and it was all very well intended, I remember her telling everybody, in an Indian house, we may not have much, but we have time and food and we're going to share both. right? And so I developed, right? So I know in my family, this is part of my generational curse that I've been breaking with like the food pairing of love. And so that's how I look at that. And I know a lot of times we're so quick to blame things on generational curses and like the hurts that come down to us. And I want to help switch that narrative into, let's think about the generational resilience and all the things that we've overcome, because that's in our blood memory too, right? We can tap into that the closer we are to spirit.
So Sarah, what do you think about that? Like when we're talking about, so generational curses, also called historical trauma, also called epigenetics, also called that old pain that you can't put your finger on, but you feel immensely compelled to go to your homelands. Like, what do you, how does that inform how you approach food? Because one thing that I noticed when I was on your Instagram, because honestly, after class, when we were looking at your Instagram, I somehow missed that. And then I was like, your Instagram is, your approach to how you present food is really beautiful. So what does epigenetics and historical trauma have to do with how you approach food?
So I hadn't thought of it, Emily, in that way. But I was so remembering my own grandfather went to boarding school and it was all about the candy. And I hadn't thought about food as being something that as love in that way so much. So as like love, or food can be love, but there has to be community and relationship, and it has to have that sort of holistic feeling behind it. And otherwise it is unhealthy, because being separated from the land is unhealthy for us. It is more healthy for us to be connected in that way. So just trying to collect my thoughts here. So in Kuru culture, we are not a matrilineal culture. I mean, we're a patriarchal culture, but women were fire bearers. We put fire down on the land to make sure that it was controlling the undergrowth and pest populations, and then, keeping our foods growing back strong, like acorns and other foods, huckleberries and things like that. And, food was it's obviously vital to all of us. And it is kind of the foundation for absolutely everything, for language and art. Even like our baskets are beautiful art, but they're also functional. And storytelling, all these storytelling pieces that we have that I heard were, stories that were really about food, like how to choose the right acorns and why and how we honor salmon, and how we honor venison, and how we treat these things. And so it's really, food is kind of the center of it, and all of the other things around it: stewardship, tending the land, language, art, tools, all of that. It's all integrated. You can't really separate one from the other. So if you are only having that one piece where you're just like, I'm eating the food, that's not the whole picture, and it isn't going to be, it isn't a healthy relationship. So we are all about relationships, and our relationship with our food, our relationship with each other, and the way that we, interact and even trade foods back and forth. We do it with a relationship. So I guess for me, how I feel is that there needs to be a whole relationship. Otherwise, it isn't going to be that full, healthy, holistic, cycle. You can't take one piece and just be like, I'm the eating piece. You have to understand what you're eating and what it means. But I know, I mean, that's very difficult. So I'm not saying like it would be something somebody would have to do all at once, but even just starting small, maybe even one meal a day where you are really intentional and you are thinking about it and you've prepared it. Maybe you even only have one small ingredient in there that is something that is traditional to you and your people. But that moment is like something that you can build on. So yeah, hopefully that answers that.
Mhm. We talk about original instructions, and it's really complicated to look at it like, well, how does that show up in my everyday life? Like, what does that mean as I'm growing my raised bed garden, you know? And I really appreciate that you bring up that it's, you know, you have to look for those little opportunities. Because I think sometimes we hear these like big um, words, you know, food sovereignty, and it's hard to figure out. It can also be daunting. People don't know how that even works. They're like, what does that mean? And it means when you go outside and you pull something out of your garden and you wash it and you chop it up and you eat it, that's food sovereignty. When you, like, I don't know, maybe you make body oils and you barter for some kind of mushroom salt, that's food sovereignty. Maybe you're taking a hike out somewhere and you see dandelion, and you know the dandelion root can really help your stomach and help your digestion. That's food sovereignty. Everyday food sovereignty is a very real and actionable concept. So I really appreciate that you're bringing up like the little things, they matter. And honestly, when you have a plate full of food, even if you didn't grow every piece on it, knowing that you grew the episote that's like on your plate, it feels so good. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a relationship. That's how I feel about it. That's what our food should be in. We should be in relationship with it. And you can tell when you're in an unhealthy relationship with food. So I think that's exactly what I mean. And when you were saying about food sovereignty, that's also food security. When you can go out and identify, because not everybody can identify even what their traditional foods are anymore. So if you can go out and identify what is a traditional food for you, that is food sovereignty and food security together.
I think these are really great topics and questions to bring up, and it kind of leads me to wonder about the topic of the month, which is matrilineal, and looking at access to land and getting back to land initiatives and kind of food sovereignty through a matrilineal lens. And I hear a term a lot called rematriate, and I'm just curious to see how you guys feel about rematriation and how that ties into memories of the land and how it affects your work.
Mhm. Well, I love the idea of doing a griever's garden, which is something that I've started talking to my tribal community about because, just like Sarah was saying, it's the relationship. And I'm seeing, when we look at diabetes, when we look at all of these issues, we're blindly consuming. There is no relationship. And so having something like a griever's garden, it's going to do several things. It's going to start to reintroduce those relationships, but it's also going to give us some healthy coping skills, and it's going to let us to non-verbally really identify if somebody is just out at the tribal center working in that garden, right? It's going to naturally bring the people together whose hearts and heads are in the same space, and it's going to start bringing us back into the community, because we've not, even before 2020, we tend to isolate. And so that's kind of, I would love to see, and that's something as I'm starting to travel the States again, is to talk to more people about the possibility of doing a griever's garden at their tribal community centers.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I also know that recently, you were talking about how we relate to one another, and a griever's garden seems like a way to have folks in community while there's a difficult time someone's facing. So you had made the comment on your Instagram, you understand why sometimes our elders become a little more reclusive is because it's hard to be in a place where you're expected to assimilate and you just feel so different, and it's easier to go back. But like, even so, I like the idea of folks being in community, makes you visible too, because I think sometimes in grief and just in struggle, we do tend to like not want to share or show that like it's hard. And a garden at least gets you out there and people can see you, because there is something to being seen when you're struggling.
Well, yeah, and what like Sarah was saying, so like I get the idea of relationship. I don't know the first thing of, I joke around being bougie native, like my ancestors put me here because they knew I needed electricity and mattresses. But I need to learn the skills of being in the garden and learning that, because I've seen as I've worked with my children and we've grown things and picked things, it is a healthy distraction because I'm learning something new. And you're right, whether it's just that cilantro that you're adding to your tacos, it's taking you back to buying the seeds, to planting it, to all the tending you did to it, right? So I'm sure Sarah can speak more to that too. I see her agreeing, but it's that healthy reclaiming.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. That's all. And I mean, the same thing goes with your traditional foods, and the way that the way that we interact as a family is that we gather our foods together, we process our foods together, and when we eat those foods together, we are able to remember that, and we can tell the story of how we gathered these foods, and we can talk about it. There's a memory, like you're eating a memory, and it's very powerful in that way. And Karuk women are basket weavers, and they are a very powerful coalition for rematriating land. So a lot of our traditional lands and preservation of our traditional lands and fighting for our traditional lands is done by women and done by basket weavers. And it is only really recently that we have had kind of a rise in food sovereignty work. And because, I mean, for many reasons, we don't have a lot of information about our traditional foodways. And, because it was considered women's work and it wasn't necessarily documented by anthropologists. And we have a break, in this boarding school generation. So there isn't a whole lot of documented information about our foodways. And I know that there is more to it than that. I know that that it was a vibrant and nuanced, foodway. I know that it was there and it was abundant. So I feel like that's what my calling is to try to figure out a way that I can help adapt these traditional foods and the stewardship piece and the language piece and the storytelling piece all together into the food piece, so that we can reaccess these foods, even if we have to adjust them right now for our modern palate, because no teenagers are going to eat acorn soup. Okay, they're just not. It doesn't taste great.
I just laugh because that was my mom's position too. She's just like acorn mush, but but like it's a deeply traditional food, like that it comes up at every big time in California, just like it's present.
Absolutely, it's true that they are always acorn soup and smoked salmon. And I love acorn soup and I love smoked salmon, but I know that there was more than that. We're all like, we're as mothers, we know that you cannot just feed your kid the same thing every single day. That is not what they're going to be like. No, I don't want it. I mean, children are children and they were always children. And we understand that, I think, deeply, that we know that there were berries and there were fun things and there were beautiful, colorful things. And kids would be drawn to that. So that was that was really my, like, the impetus for me starting this was to get my kids to love it and get my kids to be excited about eating it. And it had to be like colorful. It couldn't just be like brown cereal, you know, they just wouldn't be as interested in it. So that was really what started it. And then I realized, like, it's almost like once you pull the curtain back, it's like that scene in The Wizard of Oz where everything is black and white, and then you pull the curtain back and it's all in color, you know? So that's how it feels at this moment. Like at this point now, I see all of the color. So I want everybody else, I want to continue pulling the curtain back for other people so they can see all the color as well.
Yeah, I also wanted to follow up on something that Emily mentioned earlier, the Griever's Garden. I was hoping you could expand more on that, and also maybe offer some advice for someone who might be living in like an urban setting. Like I'm currently in Washington, D.C., so it's not very much access to land here. So I was just wondering also more about that.
Sure. So it's something that I'm just starting to propose because I see the immense need, right? And we need to do things to keep busy. Think about our ancestors, right? They didn't have the option to just sit and wallow in their pain and in their grief, right? Like their hearts didn't break less, right? But they had to tend to the gardens. They had to go on the hunts. They had to do what needed to be done for daily living, right? Like when we say put one foot in front of the other, like that's literally what they had to do. Now we have this chaos. It's so much easier. I believe this, strictly my opinion, right? Like so much we can do for ourselves right by our phone, right? It's so easy to get lost quicker and fall into that rabbit hole a lot harder with depression. And when we don't even have to go to the grocery store. Instacart will bring it, right? So like we need to start returning to these ways to help us, right? Because and I've just, a lot of these things have been popping in my head. If you guys have seen my IG, like we've been camping out, like we're living out of an RV for a while, and it's just like the going back to the routine of basic living helps with this type of thing, right? Because I can't sit in my grief if I know I have daily chores that have to be done, right? I could still choose, but honestly, when you are cooking over a fire, when you are preparing fresh fruits and vegetables, it's just different. So there are a few organizations as far as urban living. I am trying to build relationships with. Let Us Grow is one of them. I don't know if you've checked that out, but let's stay connected to see what I can do and what kind of discounts I'm going to be getting and that I can pass on through stuff like that. Because it's a hydroponics, like vertical garden, which may be an option for modern gardening.
So you're talking basically about like feeding ancestral memories. And I think that's a really important thing to touch on, right? Because sometimes with trauma and food and pairing them, and also indigenous people, there's this thing with American medicine that teaches about mindfulness. And actually, mindfulness, if it's not trauma informed, it's not good to sit in your trauma headspace, right? So you want to feed ancestral memories that are fortifying to your spirit, and not sit and feed ancestral memories that are re-traumatizing for your everyday to interact with. You know, like sometimes our ancestral memories can be triggered. You're just like, you can't stop thinking about it. My grandpa was also in boarding school. That stuff jacks me up if I like think about it too long, because there is like deep stuff there. But I know if I go out and I'm learning that arugula flowers are tasty, I can go out and harvest that. That's feeding the same the same thing in a different way, because one is accessing like pain and the other is a kind of a growth mindset, right? So it's okay if you feel that pain, but how you respond to it, if you start putting your fingers in the ground or you start working with your ancestral food medicines, there's ways that you remember yourself and remember your family and your spirit in a different way that can actually interrupt a trauma cycle. When we get in those and we can't stop thinking about it, it's a tool that you can use to, you know, tend to your own spirit when you're hurting.
Yes, I love that. See, and that's the thing that I've noticed, which I have a lot of. I had a 20-year career in mental health, and I struggled with a lot of the cognitive behavioral therapy because it tends to require the person to just repeat their story until they're desensitized, and that's not what, there is a place for cognitive behavior therapy, but it's not always appropriate for every patient and for every trauma, right? And so I love what you were saying there about you have to choose your tools and you have to use your tools well, right? And so getting in the dirt, if you have, and how amazing would it be for our communities to have, whatever they call it, grieving guarding is just because I'm in death work, right? And I know my grievers would love a place to go twice a week to work or to meet other gardeners, but they don't see a point in having a garden in their backyard because they're now a widow, right? But I love what you're saying about that. That's exactly it. It's choosing the tool that's right for you and using that tool to its best ability and changing up our tools, having lots of different tools.
I'm curious to know what you think about that, Brooke, about feeding ancestral memories.
All right, guys, I'm new at the backstage stuff. As you can tell, the last few weeks have not been that smooth. That's because I'm not tech savvy at all. But when it comes to ancestral memories and feeding that, I think really important about food activists and sovereignty work is its connection to land, but more over connection to memory. So I really noticed throughout the whole series, honestly, not just in this month, when people start talking about food and foodways and land, it just triggers all of these memories, these community memories just spew out. Some beautiful, some great, some not so great. But it's that connectivity to land, like literally imprinted on our brains and our spirits, but then also imprinted on the land itself. And I think, that's just a beautiful thing about traditional foods and traditional life ways is that it is bringing us back and healing a lot of wounds, right? We have a lot of people that were relocated or put on reservations or land theft and displaced or put into boarding schools, and that's a lot of trauma to unpack and to deal with. And so when we have these access to our lands and to our foods, it's like kind of like the beginning of reconnecting, and I think natives use that a lot, but I think all native people have a reconnection journey, not just the ones that were adopted out. I think all of us do to some degree have a reconnection journey that we need to, dig deep and root into, and whatever you want to call it. I like the term rematriation. I really do like that term. But yeah, that's what I kind of think of it. It's just like a really full, like almost like a full circle, right? You're born, you come here, and then as people who embody the medicine of birthing, we're here, we give birth. Some of us not. We're here, we create memories, we interact with the environment, we create these memories, and then we go. And what does that all mean? And then, with the added layer of trauma of being indigenous and all the layers of that ugly that gets produced and beauty that gets produced, it's kind of like an all-encompassing thing in a weird way.
Yeah, it is interesting to reflect on because it seems like we often talk about memory, land, and food almost all in the same breath under culture. And memory it is always framing what we are saying, isn't it? Like, because the history has been so erased and repackaged and revised and regurgitated under this like whack narrative that doesn't serve facts. Um, we're constantly trying to correct that in order to be visible, and that honestly maybe keeps us in a memory space in its own way as well. Just interesting. I haven't really thought about how memory, I haven't thought about memory in this context very much, I guess.
Yeah, there was this I always talk about this episode, but there's this I watched this thing. It's called Gourmet Samurai. And it's like this older Japanese man who's like retired, and he goes into all these like scenarios. Like one time he was like cooking, or he went to a restaurant and this lady agitated him, and so in his mind he like daydreams about being a samurai and what that would look like in the outcome. So he kind of like schooled this lady as the samurai. But there's this one episode that's called mackerels in the morning. And honestly, it's not that much written content, but it is for me the visual amalgamation of what it means to be human, and most importantly what it means to be indigenous. Because the way they just kind of pull in all of these things of time, memory, and space, and land, and connectivity to the water, and even the memory of his mom cooking the fish in the morning. It was such a powerful episode, and I really loved it. But yeah, I always big that show up, Gourmet Samurai.
I have to check that out. I know that there's also something about how, time is a human construct, and that means animals and plants are therefore in their own way timeless. I don't know. Native concepts of time is just so, it's very different than I think contemporary American society. It very much feels like folks want to talk about like, oh, the last 250 years, like we're on a level of talking about dynasties and millennia. Like we're gonna outlive you and your descendants. So it just feels very limited, I guess. Very very small to short time frames. So.
This reminds me of a book by Carrie Marie Norgard that's called Salmon and Acorns Feed Our People. And it's like it's a really academic book, so it's kind of hard to get through it, but it's about like the sociological effect, about what happens when you separate the people from the land. And when you wake up in the morning and you have that sense of purpose, like you were talking about, there's things that need to be done, and you have this like higher need driving you always. So you go, like, say it's a woman who it's time to burn. So she goes out to burn because she knows that it's going to kill all of the buggy acorns. Her hazel sticks are going to grow up nice, and the willow is going to grow up nice, and it's going to get rid of, the oak trees are going to remain healthy. But then when you separate that woman and that it's her only driving force, it's like innate in her DNA. It's innate. She has to do it. When you separate that person and don't allow them to do that anymore, what that does to a person psychologically and sociologically as a whole, as all women as a whole in this community, and how they have, like, what that grief feels like, and just the anguish of that. And what do you do with all that grief and anguish when you just can't do the thing that drives you, that you were born to do, that is the right thing to do? There's this relationship that's been severed. So this book talks a lot about, the consequences of that sociologically and psychologically, and what happens, the almost like the listlessness that happens, and the need to fill that void, and yeah, this conversation reminds me of that book. So I don't know if you have heard of it before, but it's called Salmon and Acorns Feed Our People. And it's written by a non-native woman, but she worked with my tribe and worked with a lot of really amazing people at the Karuk tribe. So the book is really fascinating. So it's by Carrie Marie Norgard.
That sounds like a wonderful addition. I just picked up We're Dancing for You,
By Kutcha. Yeah.
Butcher Rising Baldy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll jump into that probably after that one. Seems like a good follow-up.
Yeah.
The separation of land and language seems to be the one that like really, really hurts, you know? So I think it's probably good to reconnect on both of those fronts. It's just it's really difficult as an urban native person, right? I live where I have access to salmon like any day of the week that I want it, but I haven't always. And I remember there's just something to eating our ancestral foods that like really, I don't want to sound woo, but you're on the same wavelength as the land and the food that you come from. And so it really does nourish you on like a more than just your physical level, whatever you may believe, but it nourishes your spirit. And so I don't know, seasonal eating is a super complicated thing too when you don't have access. So, Britt, I saw Britt Reed was in here. Oh, she's still in here. Uh, iCollective has a really wonderful collection of indigenous food producers on their Facebook page. It's like pinned to the top. It's I-collective. But when you're living where you don't have access to your foods that are traditional to your people, connecting in with food producers, even changing up those little things. I started actually with chia. Chia is an indigenous food to California, and I just started like figuring out chia. How does it saturate with hazelnut milk, because hazelnuts are native to the area? Like, what can I make with that? And I'm a little somehow, but so I added some vanilla and suddenly I added hazelnut pudding. And as I'm eating it, I'm like, how old is this food possibly in terms of like these time frames we're talking about? That's probably an old food. Hazelnut milk soaked chia for California native people. It's just like probably, I mean, as old as we are. So really start to connect and get those little pieces of food that can help you remember who you are. And you can find little pieces of yourself in your indigenous foods. It's really true. When my grandpa was getting older, he was telling me stories about when his grandma was getting older. And both of them in their late years really started reverting back to their original foods in ways like it was, for our family, it was like, you know, California colonization is very new, right? So it wasn't very long ago. But my great grandma, she started wanting, she'll just eat um, food from the environment. And at that time, it was like kind of like only, it was like not good. You had to eat everything out of the store because it was about assimilation and you wanted to attain white people status so that you weren't like, there were derogatory things going on with Native people. There still are, but and people really judged her for that harshly. It was very sad. Like, it's the story of my great grandma. In her later age, she was judged not by the family, but by the outside community that she wanted deer meat. She wanted things that weren't pre-packaged. Even back in the, like 1940s, it was still heavy pressure to assimilate at that time. So yeah, it's returning those foods and those ways back to your family is pretty impactful if you ever get that opportunity to then share with your family things that your great grandmas and your great grandmas and grandpas and two-spirit aunties and uncles all ate. It's a powerful thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say and also add on a little bit. Sorry, shaky table. Really important. I think what I've learned from last year when we did the breast milk as food sovereignty, and even this one, the matrilineal, is all the taboo that we have. Like, incorporated into our daily lives around aging women, around just motherhood, around breastfeeding, breast milk. There's a lot of biophobia with our own bodies as natural producers of natural foods. And even just like talking about aging in and of itself and menopause and things like this. And I know it's because of colonization and trauma and also cultural loss. A lot of times when people think about cultural loss, they're just talking about like the right to wear certain regalia or sing certain songs. But cultural loss and indigenous perspective also includes like the aunties, the grandmas, and the grandmothers, and the healers, and the womb carers, and the birth workers that unfortunately were imprisoned by colonizers and who may have just been murdered also. So I think what's really important about this work is coming back to traditional ways and making taboo indigenous again, like just indigenizing it and talking about it. And that's why I really appreciated Sarah and Emily, because they're talking about hard topics, right? Like people like menopause and bodily changes, and then also passing and becoming an ancestor and how to care through that through foodways. So I just wanted to appreciate them and acknowledge them for that, because these are taboo, unfortunately taboo topics, and I don't think they should be. I think Emily and both Sarah have both alluded that we're not. Emily has said it. We're not doing death right, and I agree with her. We're not. Especially during these times of COVID, which is one of the reasons why we've had um, the series, because we had so many first foods teachers, and including myself and my family, we lost our matriarchs during COVID. And I think, it's really important with in terms of food and land connectivity and re-indigenizing and decolonizing and reconnecting, um, to understand that we aren't doing things right, but we have the chance while we're here to do that. So I don't know if maybe Sarah or Emily you want to speak to that, but it's kind of like where my mind was going just now.
I hadn't actually thought of it as a taboo type of thing, but I see what you're saying with that. I definitely agree. And it is something that I find, and maybe other people have noticed this too in their own Native communities, but we talk about things like that. We talk about things that like that we can't necessarily talk about with our non-Native friends. Like we can't be as candid about all the things, like, you know, we can't be candid. It's like you have to be kind of bottled up. You can't talk about death or menopause or sex or anything. You can't make a joke about it. You can't like it's too weird, outside of our communities. But when we get home, we talk about it all. And it's like it's nothing is off the table, nothing is off limits. And it may be, we may talk about it in a funny way, or we may talk about it in a serious way. And it's like, here's some help. I need some help. I'm going through this. But when you get there, that you can always just take off that like Western suit that you're wearing all the time and just be like, oh my gosh, like talk about whatever, anything. So and that's with the women. But, I feel like also the men in our community give us space to do that, and they don't make it weird. They give us space to do that and don't make it weird. But when we go, into the other, in other spaces, and like when you're non-Native people, it's like you have to talk in a very clinical way. It's different. So I don't know if anybody else has noticed that in their community. But for me, when I am really needing to talk, that is where I go, because I can't really talk to people that aren't Native in that and didn't grow up with me in that way. So I don't know if anybody else noticed that.
So I definitely can that resonates with me when I think about, not my family doesn't have that closeness, because my grandparents were, even after, like, I see that closeness with them when they used to go to their Haskell reunion, right? They went to Haskell Indian College. When they were around who they considered their brothers and sisters, right? The ones that they went to Jones Academy with, and then on to Haskell, right? That's where I saw that amazingness with them. And that's what I would love to recreate with my kids. because that's what colonization like broke in my family, right? And then just the same as was said earlier, when my grandfather was on hospice, which this blows my mind because statistically, we are less likely to receive hospice services, right? So the fact that my grandfather had hospice services 35 years ago, mind blowing, but it speaks to the fact of how well he assimilated, right? And so like we're having this issue of reclaiming, but it was a joke that he was asking for squirrel meat, right? Like just he was wanting the things that he had when he was young. He was missing the things that his mom and his sisters. He was the baby of 7, right? And so, and my dad had to keep trying to tell him, like, Dad, it's not hunting season. We can't go. Oh, that would piss him off. What the hell do you mean hunting season? Go get the squirrel. Your mom will fry it up, right? Like it was, but yeah, we definitely saw that with my granddad as he was transitioning out. And then like we spoke in the class last week, it's hard with when we're allowing our dead to die, right? Because modern technology wants to extend life, not look at the quality of life, just the longevity of life. And when we choose to stop food and water, that's hardest on the grievers. It's very natural for the body. That's what needs to happen. And you know, and it's a long process. That is a long 7 to 10 days for the caregivers and for the family. But it is you know, even in death, it's weird. It's weird to the colonized mind. It's weird to the hospice nurses that have never been around it to see that silliness and that candidness that Sarah was talking about. But it's so extremely important because that's the intimate relationships that we need, and we need that connection. And that's also why our broken hearts hurt so much, right? Because we feel that panic of we're losing another ancestor, we're losing one that, like, did we get all the stories? Are we going to remember all of their stories? Are we going to remember, right? And as we're aging, as we're becoming the aunties, you know, we're feeling that burden to, like, for me, I'm feeling that burden to reclaim. Because, you know, my grandmother, she didn't start reclaiming her heritage. She didn't feel safe in reclaiming her heritage until she was like 50, 55. You know, so that means I was 14 when I started learning beading. And when I, you know, and she would teach me traditional recipes, but she would say, it's not that traditional. Like grape dumplings is traditional, but the sugar and the flour, it's bad for us, but it's good. It tastes so good, right? So it's like, even my grandmother, you know, as she was processing that and trying to teach me, right? Like it is such, it's a process, but that's why these classes and these conversations are so important in our communities.
I wanted to add on to that because you were saying that, I mean, sometimes we, and like maybe not necessarily be able to have that relationship with your immediate family. And I think that's the thing about having a community. And I don't talk like that really necessarily with my own mom and dad and you know, but I definitely have friends, and as soon as I go home, it's like, and even their aunties and moms and grandmas, I have an easier time talking with them, you know. So but maybe somebody would have an easier time talking to my mom. So that's like the benefit of being in community, and you are all taking care of each other. And that's definitely how I felt, as you know, as I was a teenager, even growing up, and it was very difficult, but I did feel like I had a lot of community love and support, and I could talk to people. I always had somebody I could talk to, and I could talk to honestly and openly. I always had somebody, even if I couldn't talk to my mom or my dad, I always had a friend and their mom or their auntie or my own. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about being in community, I guess, is that we can have these relationships and everybody can relate to each other and what we're all going through. And we take care, they're taking care of each other rather than living in a silo where it's just you, your husband, and your 2 children and nobody else, you know. So this is more, it's an open community.
Yeah, just going off of what you just said too, like I think definitely community is like some of the most vital pillars to upholding like our culture, and um, that actually made me want to ask also, do you have any like stories that stick out to you that um, kind of exemplify wait. So I was just wondering, when you're seeking out like indigenous foods, recipes, or practices, I'm wondering how connecting to that culture too. Are there any stories that pop up to you that where it involved like a community, people outside of the immediate family, or within your family that kind of exemplifies how food sovereignty is matrilineal and um, let me know if that question wasn't clear, but just curious about that.
Well,
Um,
oh, go ahead, sir.
so if I mean, for me, probably like 75% of everything that I know about food, I learned from somebody outside of my own immediate family. So, and from women. So that I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, so I have a lot of memories that don't necessarily involve my immediate family of being out on the water fishing or um picking berries, gathering acorns, things like that that weren't necessarily, but there are other women, and especially with basket weaving materials. My mom is not a weaver, so that's something that I seek out for myself. And I have a weaving teacher, and she's not a part of my family either, but we are all community together. So, I see her a couple of times a year usually, and it's a it's a great time, and she teaches me, and we laugh, and we have all of that, you know, relationship sharing and emotional like bonding. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's basically what I was asking too, because um, for me, I definitely rely on like a larger portion of people like outside of my immediate family as well. So I really that resonates with me um, when trying to learn more and more about my own culture and history. So thank you.
I'm also noticing that I am feeling more driven to share the things that I know with other people and try to kind of recruit more people or younger people into, and to show them what I know so that I can come alongside them the same way that my community did for me. And it's almost like this drive to be of service to your community in that way. So yeah, it's interesting. And I just had and it's funny because I was talking to my best friend still lives on the res in Hoopa, and she's just not really into traditional foods. It wasn't into traditional foods, and had a beautiful white oak a white oak tree right on her property. And I was just like, this is amazing. And now she tends it and she takes care of it. And and then I go up there, I'm like, let's go, we got to go get some blackberries. So we got to get ready to go. So we go up to her auntie's house because she has this huge blackberry patch, but you can see that it's like already a bear has like made tracks through the patch, and we just kind of like follow in behind the bear. And you're laughing, you're in the sun, it's hot, the smell of berries and all of that, it's like it just soaks in to your memories. And that's almost like a way of counteracting the negative memories, I think, is by really having all of your senses immersed in this really positive, traditional situation and memory. Because you were standing there picking berries with your girlfriends like that. I'm sure like my ancestors were doing that and laughing and talking about, boys or whatever, girls, I don't know. So
Yeah. So we're in the last 30 minutes of class, and I wonder, do we have any questions from the audience? If you have them, please put them in the chat. We've got a number of people who are also joining us on Facebook, so please put that in the Facebook Live chat if you've got any questions as well. It's always it's interesting to think about the ways that we engage food, and I wonder if you would share with me any memories that you have. Like, the topic of the month is matrilineal, right? Like, what are some matrilineal memories, whether from your mother, your grandmother, or like community aunties? As Sarah just mentioned, you don't always learn everything from someone exactly inside your tribe and your band and like the families around your band. So that means that there are mothers everywhere. We've got all kinds of moms, aunties, grandmas. I mean, what are some stories that you could share with us that really maybe uplift older women, and how older women contribute to the community through food or food sovereignty? Because as you mentioned, Brooke, there's a real invisibility, especially around, like, as we get older as non-men, there's just less attention paid to older women. So that's why it's important when we see elder women, greet them, check in, make eye contact, smile, once you get hip to it, you start noticing, like, Native women, older women, but just women in general. People will walk by, not even sometimes acknowledge an older woman. So as older non-men, I know that's how I try and operate, right? I actively look at and look for and see older women as like as much as I possibly can, because I know, well, when I'm older, I want to be seen too. It feels good to be seen. So do you have any stories you could share, like, that uplift older women in food or older mothers?
Well, for me, like I shared last week, I've been really disconnected from my community, not only because my parents and grandparents were far away from their ancestral lands, but being a military wife. I've been all over the world and the country the last 20 years. But it's interesting to me that my spirit felt most at ease and at rest in Oahu. And when I take time to stop and think about that, it's the whole spirit of Ohana. And I know last week we had someone here from Hawaii. I hope they're here and they might chime in and help me with this. But it is this whole spirit of Ohana, and that everybody's connected and there is such respect for the aunties, right? And I was naturally drawn, just like Desiree was saying, like I was naturally drawn to the aunties and how to help them and what can they teach me, right? Like as I'm getting older, right? When you're young and sassy, you think you know it all. And I was like, oh, auntie, please teach me. Auntie, what can I help you with? Right? Because I knew there was just this wealth of wisdom waiting to be shared. And they needed the people to identify who was willing to learn and hear it. And I was blessed to be on Oahu for 4 years and to really connect with a lot of the Hawaiians there that could help and share. And it was interesting because they would always ask me which part of the island I was from. I was like, oh, auntie, I'm not from here. And they're like, oh, well, you sound like you're from here. Because I picked up Pidgin really quick and really easily. But it was such a blessing, whether it was learning how to roast or wrap the banana leaves. I always did not know what I was doing, but I learned the value in being willing to learn, right? And I was craving and starving auntie attention because I didn't grow up with that. I grew up with, get out of the kitchen, you're a kid, you're being a mess, you're making a mess. What's going on? Get out of here. You should be seen and not heard and not, right? And so I still have that little girl spirit who wants an auntie to be like, come here, do this, let's help. And so I've actively tried to find those situations for my daughter, and like, come on, let's go see what auntie's doing today, and we were able to be a part of that community. And I've been so blessed because, like I also shared last week, it's been a lot of the other tribes that have taken me in and loved me in, whether it was the Ponca tribe when I was in school down in Stillwater, whether it was the Gila River tribe that took me in when I was in high school. I'm very blessed for the communities of those aunties that could teach me their ways and to just make me a part of their community, you know, and to plant those seeds in me now that I can have the confidence in the faith to do the work that I do and to honor them in that.
Um, so this is a tough question. I have a lot of food memories. I feel like my whole life is peppered with food memories that are positive. I'm half Italian and I have a, really boisterous Italian family on their side. And that's really, that I think is really where I first realized the importance of food and family in a positive way, and that it could be a positive thing, and that it is, all about community and family and relationships. And my mother is Karuk, and she is an amazing gardener. My mom, for all of the things that, my mom is an amazing gardener, and she was always canning and making jellies and jams. And I remember my mom being amazed that my mom said, if you go and pick, and I was real little, but if you go and pick and fill up this bucket, and it was like, I don't know, a big bucket. If you fill this bucket up with blackberries, then I'll make a blackberry cake. And I was like, whoa, you know how to do that? Like, you know how to make a cake? I was like, that's amazing. Was so into it. So I try to incorporate that with my own kids, like, and getting them out there, and trying to, I guess, surprise them and teach them at the same time. But yeah, I have a lot of food memories. My mom was an amazing gardener, and then this is recorded, so I feel bad saying it, but she was not a great cook. So it was like she could make a really rockin' jelly, and yeah. But I think I did most of my learning on my own and with other people in my community. So yeah.
Don't feel sad, Sarah. We all have those miserable cooks in our family.
But she could really rock a blackberry cobbler, all right? And I still haven't quite got that down. I don't know how she did it, but I still remember how amazing I thought that was and at the time. And I was really, really little, but it's one of my earliest memories is bringing home, like, dragging this bucket of blackberries, like, I did it. And she was like, all right, I'm gonna make a cake. And she made this blackberry cobbler, and it was like the best thing I ever tasted as a kid. Like, it was the best thing. And I remember marveling at her, like, wow, you know so much. Like, you really know, like, have all of this crazy knowledge baking a cake. Wow. So
Yeah, I think those are like some of those sweetest memories is when you're like have those little small moments of time and you're just like, figuring things out. I remember like my grandma was just we grew up in an extended family. I didn't realize how not normal that was to American society, but I basically grew up with my what they call like your second uncles, third uncles, all the way up down the line. I think most northern natives will call them grandpas. And third cousins, second cousins removed. Like I had such a big household. So like the simplest things my grandma would do. And just like you'd be like, whoa, that's so delicious, and you're little. So it's like everything seems so immense and it is. I remember my uncle, because we also grew up with my uncle in the house. He passed away from Hodgkin's lymphoma a couple of years back. Um, when I was little, he said, I'm gonna make us special eggs. And I was like, okay. And I didn't realize, I just thought these were just always special eggs. All he put was milk and butter. That was it. And oh my God, I'm gonna cry. But like I realized that they are special eggs because they were my uncle's eggs and he taught me how to make them. Even though it was simple, really bad, just a load of butter of ingredients to have, but it was special. So yeah, those memories are just so important to have. We are towards like the 15-minute mark. I want to open it up to the audience again. If anybody wants to come up and talk or ask questions, we're definitely here. If not, just another question I have with regards to like how you guys have been faring with food culture and just food sovereignty in your communities, especially with the elders during COVID. I know it's been really difficult, as I mentioned earlier before. I had a tremendous outbreak in my family. We had about 20 people who had got COVID. Some of them, we lost a matriarch, my aunt, she didn't make it, and my uncle is also not faring well now after it because they have COVID lung. But it's been very difficult, I know, across all of Indian country, whether urban, res, it doesn't, it's just so indiscriminate. So how have you guys been doing during that time with in terms of food access and sovereignty and just maintaining community?
Well, for us, it's been difficult in the sense that for me, I'm a death worker. I always expected to be with my family in these moments and to help them and for them to benefit in having somebody in the death and funeral industry that understood these things. And so to be geographically unable to travel to them, extremely painful. And I've had to keep myself busy by serving the community that I'm in, right? And just being thankful that the community that they're in is trying to reach and serve them, right? And so that has been an incredibly humbling situation. My stepdad transitioned December 3rd, so I went into mourning for him, and that was incredibly difficult to see too, because he was out in Maricopa County, one of the really hard hit places for Indigenous communities, and to also know that he was in a smaller hospital where there was a lot of racial tension there, and so there was a lot like that. It fuels the fire when you're having to deal with the race issue on top of, right, just the heartache and the crisis and the chaos of what it is. So yeah, I occupied my time trying to educate the ones that were interested and that wanted to listen and who needed the guidance, and still now, like anybody that needs, the help through getting the FEMA, reimbursements and things like that, getting myself involved with food delivery. I was able to get connected with food banks and do drop-offs for the elders and for the veterans in our community. And I was thankful that I had the means to offer my vehicle that could haul, 80 boxes of food out to the elderly and to the vets in my community. So I was thankful to be able to help with that, to distract myself.
Yeah, so I live like 7 hours from my community. California is enormous. So I live in the Bay Area and they live up really kind of close to the Oregon border. So and really rurally. So it's a very difficult to get there. And there's also kind of a despair feeling, like not being connected, not being able to go, and knowing that if I do go, that I'm putting somebody in danger. So even though I really want to be there, I want to help, I want to be there, that it's almost am I doing it because I will feel better, or am I, who am I serving in that if I am there? So what I did do was connect with the California Indian Museum and Cultural Center, and I did meal kits, traditional food meal kits, and we sent them out to the CIMCC community elders and the youth that run that program as well, and the food sovereignty program. And we did Zoom classes and demos, kind of similar to the one that I did. And we had discussions, and everybody had to turn their camera on so we could see each other and interact and just sort of keep a sense of community, especially for these elders that were isolated and really feeling isolated, and a place for them to talk and reminisce and talk about different foods for them. And it was a discussion and a way to stay connected. And we did a series of these meal kits and different ones, all sorts of different ones. But yeah, so that's what I did, I think, to stay connected to that work and feel like I was being helpful. And, and now that I'm vaccinated, I am going to be able to travel, which is just like so exciting. I'm really thrilled. So thrilled to spend the summer up north. I don't know if I'll come back.
Yeah, just going off of that, no, it's great to hear how both of you are just doing your best during this time of COVID. So I also was wondering, how do you think COVID-19 has unveiled the ways or emphasize how much we need food sovereignty, and if it's related in any way between those two?
I can take that. For me, what I have noticed is that there was a huge disconnect in food security, and that when we were not, when especially people that are relying on public transportation to get around, or like an elder bus to take them into the grocery store and get their groceries, and there's a food security issue. So and I think that is where I felt like I needed to really like kind of kick it into a high gear to show people like, this is what you can eat right now. This is what is outside. This is, what you can go and gather. And this is how you preserve it and how you keep it throughout the year. And this is the nutritional content and the benefits of this particular food. So I did notice that there was the food security issue. There was just like a spotlight right on that. So, learning about traditional foods is a way to combat that. And if this ever happens again, that, hopefully there will be more people that have that kind of knowledge that they can, be food secure in these situations.
For our family, it really helped reset us. Actually, about a month before we went into safer at home orders, I kind of flipped out on my family. I have two neurodivergent teens, and so if you've ever worked with autism, have autism in your family, the food issues can run you rampant and run your house. And about a month before, just out of my humanness and my struggle, like I went down. I'm like, we're just down to water and eggs. Like, peanut butter and jelly is your new fancy, and you get it once a week. Like I was that mom. I flipped out, like I said. And then in March of 2020, when we went into stay at home and there wasn't the food, and I was like, by the end of April, I was nervous to go to the grocery store once a week. Like, it definitely highlighted and brought that focus. And that was also about the time I started running again. I hadn't been a runner in a long time. I used to weigh 300 pounds, and I know a lot of in our community use running as good medicine. And I started to do that just because my mind was going crazy. And then that kind of connected more of the dots for me, right? Like, whole foods. When your body is doing things that are healthy, it needs that healthy nourishment. The things that you had gotten accustomed to, right? Like when you're changing the pH in your body, you don't want the flour and the sugar, and it doesn't do anything for your body, and your body's like, why are you giving me this? And so personally, I went through that experience of it highlighting needing to get the whole foods, and to not allowing my kids, in our privilege and even with their neurodiversity, like I can't let it run our house, because when everything happened, it set me up for bigger problems, right? And so it caused, like, it was that crash course in detoxing, and this is what's available and you're going to make it work, that my family needed to reset. And then it's given me the desire to be more educated and more focused, and then to look for people like Sarah that can teach me the things that I was never taught, right? So
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, I think with like just COVID-19 and food sovereignty, and also just like any kind of rematriation, it's just like all connected. And again, it just goes to show we need community more than ever now. So thank you for that. Does anybody have any other questions they'd like to ask? We're pretty much at the 3-minute mark, so last chance.
No, well, if not, I'd like to offer that we have a dedication that we just like to do to wrap up the end of the month. Brooke, if you could make me a host on the Zoom so I could share it. We have a graphic that dedicates our programming in loving memory of some folks who have been lost for COVID. So we'd just like to maybe do a moment of silence if there aren't any other questions. But I can't share the graphic until I'm the host. So
Yeah, just bear with me a second, because I don't
I
think
will
I
pull
could
it
make
up when I get to
on
do that.
the Facebook Live. So just give me a second and I'll pull up the graphic. Hold on.
Just also want to say, it's okay if you're struggling right now. It's okay if it's difficult and you don't feel like you can get out and plant a whole garden, or you can do those sorts of things. Like, there's a real cultural thing that says, you have to be strong, you have to warrior up, right? But educated warriors who are emotionally intelligent are greatly needed, right? And part of emotional intelligence is allowing ourselves to move forward, and then we move back when we don't feel strong. But knowing that you can always return back, and like that's okay if you're feeling some kind of way. So yeah, just COVID's hard. So Brooke is going to share right now our dedication to some relatives that have been lost, and I think we'll just close out quietly if that's okay with everyone, and just say thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us for this week. And in honor of the matriarchs that have been lost, we appreciate you spending this time, sending smudge up, prayers, good vibes, good energy, whatever it comes like in your context or your tradition. Thank you for joining us for First Foods, and we'll see you this next coming month for more programming. Have a good night. Good night.